Lisa, thanks for joining us. You've got
My
a
pleasure.
yeah, you've got a fabulous story to tell and share with us. And so why don't we just begin by your childhood, let's say, because that's where everything began.
Okay.
You had a very difficult time. You had abuse of many kinds, including sexual abuse and so on. And so why
That's
don't you
correct.
just unravel your story for us a little bit?
Okay. I grew up in an abusive family, and there was a family member that began to sexually abuse me at age 8, and that continued on a regular basis for the next 4 years until I was 12 years old.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, I told my mother, and she didn't believe me, and was unwilling to remove me or the other person from the situation, and so I ran away from home basically, and was homeless um, off and on for many years after that.
Didn't you say to me earlier when we were talking about this that you actually lived in a forest and slept on a mattress?
I slept in an old mattress in the woods. There were many times when I would sleep in church doorways because I thought maybe that would be safer for me.
Yeah.
People might leave me alone. We're talking 12, 13 years old. Pretty scary.
Yeah.
But I felt that that was safer than being at home. So if
Ah,
that gives you
okay.
any idea of what was going on at home.
Right. So you were then a girl of the streets, if you will,
Yes. Yes, I was.
an IV drug user?
That's correct. By the time I was 14, I was a full-blown IV drug user.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so describe if you can. I mean, very few people have had that experience, that they've heard about it, so to speak. But what's it like? I mean, what goes on in your head? What is your self-image like? What is it? Are you just into survival? Does everything scare you? How would you portray that?
Um, well, I was in survival mode. So I felt panic on a regular basis. I was always in fight or flight. I felt like a deer in the headlights most of the time. And it wasn't even about living. It was just about surviving.
Yes.
Hated myself. I couldn't look myself in the mirror. I felt that I was worthless. If my own family couldn't love me, who could?
Of course. Of
Um,
course.
and I felt very hopeless. I never thought I would live to be 18.
Yeah. Okay. But you did.
I did.
And if I understand it, you actually graduated from high school just barely. Did you take some tests for that? Did you attend high school?
I did. I became pregnant with my first child at 15,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't want to bring her into the same kind of life that I had. And so I mustered every ounce of whatever strength I had and enrolled in school and went to an alternative school where I literally brought her to school with me every day for the
Yeah.
last few years of high school. But I
Yeah.
just was determined that I wanted to break that cycle, if I could.
Sure. Okay. Well, time went on, and I think you told me earlier something like 10 years ago is when you first came across EFT.
About 11 years ago,
11,
yeah.
11 years ago. But prior to that, you had attempted many other therapies or methods or whatever to get beyond the emotional stuff you were facing.
I did. I saw many talk therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. I tried many different anxiety medications, depression medications. I tried religion, meditation, um, all sorts of alternative therapies, some of which I had some results. They would take the edge off or work a little bit, but nothing that really had a major shift in my feeling or my life. I just couldn't get out of the rut that I was in. Um, I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't maintain relationships with people. Um, so even though some of these things helped a little bit, I could never get to the point to where I could move up in life out of that pit that I felt I was in.
Yeah, okay. And then about 11 years ago, I guess you came across what was then my free EFT manual.
Yeah.
You studied that.
I did.
And we discussed that previous to this little conversation here, but you were a real student of that. I mean, a lot of people just take that book and they just sort of read it and get the idea of it, but you really dug into it and
I did.
and did it, including the emphasis that I had on being specific where possible.
Correct.
However, and this is something it's really important for us to discuss for those listening in, you did not go right to specific events.
No, I didn't.
You went to more global routes to begin with, to take the edge off because the specific events were just too painful for you. You had no help. You couldn't afford any help. It was all do it by yourself type stuff, you know.
Yes.
So a lot of global stuff, right?
Yeah, it was. And you have to understand, when I first found the manual, I was living in a state of panic constantly. I was having panic attacks that could last weeks. So the thought of doing anything to create further intensity, I just couldn't even imagine it. So I started by just addressing the physical feelings that I had. So even though my heart's beating faster, even though I feel like a deer in the headlights, trying to take the edge off of the physical symptoms I was having, because at that point, my physical being was just constantly in panic mode.
Well, interesting enough, you did something almost intuitively that we try to teach a lot, and that is you were aiming this at physical things, because behind the scenes, your physical symptoms and your emotional issues are linked. And so a lot of times it's easier to aim EFT at the physical thing. You know, my heart is pounding, my head hurts, but you know, the physical pain, you aim it there and you are also addressing the underlying emotional issue. We find that over and over. So you were doing that, and you're also using some global type things. I'm looking here at this is an article you did for our website a long time ago. And in fact, it's on your website as well now, but I'm looking at some of the approaches you were using. You would say things like, even though I can't concentrate, even though the noise hurts me, even though the light hurts me, even though I'm so nervous for no reason, even though I'm terrified and I'm only watching TV. You know, you were approaching this thing very globally so you could take the edge off, because to get to the specifics was way too painful, right?
Right. It just, I thought I would overwhelm myself if I went right to the specifics.
Okay.
And I knew that's where I had to go eventually in order to get any real and lasting relief. I understood that because I pored over the manual and I really did study it. And I understood that in order to release those issues, I needed to address them specifically. But at the time, I just knew that I would overwhelm myself if I went right there and didn't take the edge off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me just interject one thing for those watching in. I'm watching the video quality, and the video quality of my screen is getting a little fuzzy and so on. And that's just has to do with technology and Skype. So the message here is much more important than the video pristineness. So I'm hoping the listeners to this will digest that and understand that. Okay. So at any rate, so then you eventually got to the point where you can get to the specific events.
Right. After my physical symptoms started to reduce, I then globally approached some of the attitudes and feelings I had about myself in the situations. But again, I wasn't getting specific into the situations yet. It was more about, even though I hate myself, even though I hate my mother, whatever it was, again, just trying to basically sneak up or gradually move my way in towards the specifics of the issue.
Yeah, but to get to something very specific, like the very specific things that happen during a sexual event,
Yeah.
molestation, for example.
Mm-hmm.
A bit too close to home yet.
Right.
However, that's what you need to do if you're really going to take this issue and dig it up by the roots and get rid of it. Otherwise, you're just chopping the tops off that weed, if you will, leaving the roots there to reemerge again.
That's right. Even though I had some relief, and I might say more relief than I'd ever had with anything else, the panic attacks continued. My depression continued. It wasn't until I was able to address specific events, specific moments in time, that I said, even though this specific thing happened at this time and we were in this room and these were the circumstances and this is what happened next, until I addressed all of those events, the panic attacks continued. But once I addressed all of those events, and over 4 years there were many, but I can tell you I didn't address them all. I can't even remember them all. But the ones that stuck out in my mind, I went through bit by bit. And after I addressed those events, my panic attacks went away, my depression went away. I stopped using drugs and alcohol completely, and I haven't touched them since. I became employable. I'm actually an EFT practitioner now. But once I addressed those things from the roots, the panic attacks never came back. I haven't had a single panic attack in 10 years.
Yeah. Actually, you're an EFT practitioner specializing in trauma of this type.
That's
and
right.
you have a very full practice, if I understand it correctly.
I do. I have a very full practice.
Yeah.
And because of what I went through, I think I have a unique perspective into helping others that have gone through trauma. And I believe wholeheartedly in EFT. I know that it works. And I know the desperation and the place of hopelessness that people who've gone through trauma come from. And to be able to offer them this hope is just, it's amazing.
Yeah. Let me go back just a second, Lisa. When you said you didn't address all the specific events, that allows me to talk about one of the features of EFT for our listeners called the generalization effect. You can have 1,000 of these horrific events, just like some of our war veterans have, but you don't have to address them all because they have a commonality among them. And so we call this the generalization effect. You can do 5 or 10 or 15 very, very well. And there's enough commonality, there's a similar setting, there's a similar people and so on. There's enough commonality, similar emotions. There's enough commonality so the rest of them are addressed while you're doing the 10 or 15 really well. They collapse as well.
Right.
And they generalize over everything. So that's an important thing. I want to get to one other thing if I can. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you on something?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay. I want to get to something else if I can, and that has to do with the rather common use on the internet by EFTers of scripts. That is, but what I mean by that is people have some difficulty with the question, what do I say?
Yeah.
And so people put together even books sometimes with all these things you can say, pre-arranged words that you can plug into a circumstance. And I want to ask you, being an experienced practitioner, what your view is of those scripts.
I think it's fine as a jumping off point. But if all you're using is a dialogue and a script, you're never getting to your own specific events.
Yeah.
And that's really where you need to go in order to pull these things out by the roots. Otherwise, they just come back over and over again. You're really kind of treading water. So again, it may take the edge off, but if you really want to resolve anything, you really need to get specific, and no script is going to do that for you. You really have to do that for yourself or with someone you're working with and get specific, with the events that are at the heart of the issue.
The an example of that, a script might be, even though I've had this really bad experience when I was a child. I mean, that could be a script, and it's sort of pointing towards a specific event. And so, I mean, that that, at least on the surface, seems like it's getting where you need to go, but not really, because your specific event that you have, I mean, you have different emotions that go on that somebody else would have. You have different events. You have different feelings. Some are physical, some are in different parts of your body and so on. And you have different emotional reactions. You have all these things that needs to be customized to that. Otherwise, you're just sort of hitting the top of it. To use this metaphor again, you're cutting the tops off the weeds,
right,
and leaving the roots there. So I really want to honor the people that go to a lot of work to put the scripts together, but I also want to point out, they leave a lot on the table. So.
Right. Yeah. It may be a place to start, but certainly I've never seen, and I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people. I've never seen someone's issues completely disappear and never come back, being that general.
Yeah.
You really have to get specific.
All right. Great. Lisa, thank you. It was so delightful. Thank you for sharing your stories, your insights, and so on. It's really, really been my privilege.
Thank you, Gary. Mine too.
Okay. All right. Bye.